Good morning. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yerushalmi Maisris, Perek Aleph, Halacha Dalet. Actually, we are in middle of Halacha Dalet. We're learning today Daf Zayin, and we left off in middle of the Mishnah, all the way on top of the Amid, HaPered, VaHatzimukin, VaHacharuvin. So first of all, the Mishnah, after giving us that klal of when do we say that the Gemar Malacha is actually going to be the critical point from which onwards it's mechuyev, the produce is called bonafide tevel, and it has to be tied to the point that one may not even consume achilas arai, casual consumption, snacking from it. The Mishnah spoke about whether you want to merchandise it, meaning if you want to sell it in the market, versus whether you plan to eat it at home. When you plan to eat it at home, actually the taking of the produce home, it entering the home the normal way, that's called Re'iyas Pnei Habayis, will trigger the ultimate status of Tevel, and all of the other examples that the Mishnah gives, or the psukim that the Mishnah gives regarding what's the Gemar Malacha regarding this or that product, that is all about produce that's planned to be sold in the market, which means it's not going to be taken home. And really, the Gemara today is going to discuss, why don't we say the Iyas Pnei Hashuk when it comes to the market? And as we'll see, that when people plan to sell their produce out there, they don't mind selling it from the field. And if a customer will come to the field, they will sell it from the field. Elamah, they normally bring it to its final stage of production or of its processing, and that's where we're going to start off today. The Mishnah will resume listing various, the Mishnah will enumerate the Gemar Malacha regarding various types of produce. Now, we will also speak in the Mishnah, at the end of the Mishnah, vis-a-vis what's the Gemar Malacha for wine and for oil, and I would like to now share the way the wine press and the way the olive press was set up in the times of Chazal, and to become familiarized with certain key words, and also to know a huge difference between the production of wine versus the production of oil. So when it comes to the production of wine, we're going to have in the wine press something that's called the gas elyoina. The gas elyoina is an inclined surface. It's an inclined surface upon which the grapes are put. It is on top of the gas elyoina that the grapes are treaded upon, whether it is the way people fantasize people's dirty feet, or they had the different kalim, however they did it. The grapes are squeezed on the gas elyoina. The juice flows from the gas elyoina into a pipe. And let's get familiar. The word of the pipe is a tzinor. And that tzinor, that pipe, brings the juice into a boir, in English, into a cistern, which is in the bottom of the wine press, and it is in the boir that the wine ferments. And here's another very important factor, that when the wine ferments, the seeds, the skins, what we call the shemarim, they rise to the surface, they go up, and it has to be skimmed off the top. Now, there is the skimming that happens in the boir. There is also, after you skim off the seeds and the skins and the shemarim, you take that liquid and you put them into a barrel, and in the barrel it ferments further, and vited, as it ferments in the barrel, the skins and the seeds, some of them not as heavy, not as thick, not as coarse as the original, also will rise to the top of the barrel. And again, it's going to be skimmed off the top of the barrel prior to it being sold. Really, what we will learn today in the Mishnah will be subject to a machlokes tanoim. And right today, we're not going to learn the other opinion. We're going to be speaking, our Mishnah will be of the opinion that the Gemar Malacha of the wine is going to be once you skim the shemarim off the top of the boir. There are other Tanoim that hold that since from there it goes into a barrel, and then as it ferments, it becomes even better. There's a separation between the wine and the residue. And the residue is removed the second time. The Gemar Malacha is after the second time. That's not the sheet of our Mishnah. But I just want to focus on something interesting that I'm learning, that the shmarim, by wine, they rise to the top. So we're going to have the gasel yoina, the tzinor, and the boir. Now, when it comes to an olive press involves the following steps. Before they would put the olives in the actual press, they would put the olives into a bag, into a sack, or first they would put it, they would crush the olives with a stone that's called a memel. We had this not that long ago. Mem lamed, mamila, memel. You crush the olives, they become pulp-like. Those olives are gathered into a sack. The sack had a lot of, it was very porous. The sack is called the akel. The sack is put in the olive press. The heavy beam, the picture that whoever's looking at, that's the olive press, that the sack was put under this heavy beam. And as the beam is pressing down on the olives, see, the mile of them being in the akel is that the olives don't fly all over the place. And the juices that are extracted from the olives flow through the akel, they flow through the sack, and they go into the uka. The uka means a trough. And Kavan showed one type of trough. So whether the trough was circular, whether they would have a trough in front of the press, but it would be built in a way that when it gets squeezed, the juices flow in a certain direction, and it's gathered in the uka. Now, here, interestingly, by olives, the impurities of the olives settle at the bottom. They don't need to be skimmed off the top. That means, and the olive rises to the top. The oil rises to the top. So once the oil is in the uka, according to our Mishnah, in this trough, it's already the gemar malacha. Even because there, when you sell it, you understand, you don't have to remove the shemarim. You just take the oil off the top and you leave the shemarim where they are. Shemarim by wine go to the top. Shemarim of the olives, they go down to the bottom. Here we go. That's a great picture again. Now, a very important rule that we learned at Rambam, we should be familiar with it, that midrabanan, there are really 6 events that bring the product to its gemar malacha. Remember, if Shabbos comes in, if you sell a product, we're going to learn later what those 6 are. And one of them will be cooking. That means that if the item is cooked, even if it didn't meet the requirements that we read in the Mishnah, fact that it's cooked, that is its gemar malacha. Ubalash Chazal, cooking is koiva'as, it sets it lemaiser. Because of that, we're going to have in our Mishnah, a machlokes tanoim, which really we are familiar with this machlokes in Hilchas Shabbos, because on Shabbos one is not allowed to cook. And we're going to go into the dinim of klei rishon and klei sheni, exactly what cooks, what doesn't cook. I know how we end up making a coffee, it's completely out of the world on Shabbos, not to cook. But let's go with the premise that klei rishon could be mevashel. Let's go with the premise klei sheni is not mevashel. And a klei rishon that used to be on the fire, but was removed from the fire, but the item is still in the klei rishon, this will be subject to a machlokes tanoim in our Mishnah, whether that is still able to cook. And I'll speak up more details, at least according to some rishonim, when we come to this topic. And again, it's going to be in a geya to maisres, because bishul is one of the 6 that are kovas lamaser. That will be the Mishnah. The Gemara, don't worry, these are not big dafim. It's very good to go through it thoroughly. The Gemara will unpack many details of the Mishnah. And again, it's fascinating. Horticulture. We're learning about how you plant things, how things get ready, how they used to package it. And just to repeat what Kavan said at the end of yesterday's shir, that really, I want to word it like this: packaging is the gemar malacha. Happens to be that they didn't package it the way we package things today. And that will be clear from the Gemara. So many of the details that we are learning in the Mishnah and in the Gemara have to be translated with the same neshama, but in a different application nowadays. It's all about the item being packaged, where the seller says, that's it, now this is ready to be sold. We're going to see about, the human nature, how packages are made pretty, and how we all fall for it. That's why you say, don't judge a book by its cover. Why do you have to say this? Because we judge the book by the cover. And that's going to be connected to the Meiruach. We'll see how far we can get into the sugya. So Chevra Daf Zayin, all the way on top of the Amid. So the Mishnah now will enumerate 3 items that were left to be dried. That means that you would harvest it, you would take it, or you would pick it off the tree. You would lay out these items on a field, sometimes on a roof, wherever they would leave it out to dry. And then once the item was dried enough, they would gather it and they would put it in a pile. The putting it in the pile will be considered the Gemar Malach. And that's for petted. Interesting. People used to dry pomegranate seeds. That's the meaning of petted. Simukam are raisins. We're familiar with that. Okay, grapes that are left out to dry. And charuvim also would mean dried out carobs. These 3 are connected to the fact that they are being dried. So when do we have its Gemar Malacha? Mishiyame daremo, when they are heaped into a pile. Because from there, it's going to be taken to the market. And again, the Gemara is going to ask, why didn't you say the Iyas Hashuk? We don't do that. From when you finish doing the final step in your field, in your home, in your factory, that's already going to be koiva'as l'maisa. Habit solim, when it comes to onions. So what's koiveya l'maisa is by ptzolim, mishayaf kilu. Yaf kilu means, as the Gemara will elaborate, the word yafkilu means you peel the outer layers, the outer klipas. Why would people peel the outer layers? Again, selling, marketing, people take a look at something, they see the external. And it's not that uncommon that in many items, many vegetables, let's speak about onions, the most outer layer gets a little bit moldy or gets a little bit ruined, and it gives a bad impression. So some farmers, some wholesalers, they would dafka make effort to package it pretty, and that's what they would do. They would go through their b'tsalim, they would take off the ruined, the rotten, if there are outer peel, the outer skin. If that is what they do, when they did that, that's it. That's the Gemar Malach. But not all farmers did that. Some farmers didn't care. Certainly not, I'm going to call this wholesale. Maybe the retailers needed to do it. So that's like we had yesterday. Not everyone did all the steps. If the owner, if the grower doesn't have that minig to take off the outer skin if they're rotten, so what is its Gemar Malacha? Mishiyama darema. Again, when you put them into a pile, onions are put into the pile. Unlike we learned yesterday, the watermelons or other heavier items, that they were not piled, they were laid out in rows on the field before they were taken to the market. Hatvua, this is the famous, tvua refers to the 5 grains. What is its Gemar Malacha? Misha Yimoreach, that's called the Meiruach. The Meiruach is smoothing the pile of grain. I don't think we'll be able to get into it today. I don't think we'll get all the way to the bottom of Daf Zayin Amud Beis, but we're going to have more details. It's interesting of how they did it, and there's going to be a challenge on this. But normally it was threshed, and then it was winnowed. Now that you cleared out the impurities, we're speaking about people that wouldn't sell flour. We're speaking about people that sold the actual kernels. They would pile it, and then they would smooth out the pile. They would make the pile look pretty, uniform, smooth by pressing it down. That is its completion of its production. That's its.
Sorry, Rabbi, what does smoothing out accomplish besides the fact that it looks good?
That the way we'll see in the Gemara, Vlad, many people went to the fields to buy. It's not the marketplace. Mistama, they got a better price because they are affording the farmer the no transportation. And people would declare, in other words, people would be happy when the lekeach would come to the field. My father loved it when people came to his factory to buy his curtains. Why do I have to go to them? He would say they should come to me.
I get that. I just don't know.
And therefore, Vlad, since it was shayach for people to sell things in the field, a seller makes his product look prettier than it really is. You make things look pretty. You're going on a shidduch date. And then, the packaging is so like this. When a guy walks into the field and he sees a nice pile of grain, it looks attractive. It's mamish the bluff of Elamazah. Like all of these things, you took off the outer skin of the onion. Yeah, because if someone is going to walk into my field, they're going to see my onions look gewaldig. Little did they know that every single onion was foiled, was fardarbin, but you don't see that.
Oh, it's like clothing. I mean, doesn't your clothing show who you are? I mean, don't we say you are what you wear, and that's
so.
Rabbi
Yechanan karele limanusa mechabdusa, and where did we learn this? Yakir, maybe we'll remember. But the vart is that the Gemara says clearly that the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael did not make an effort to wear nice clothing, because in Israel people are deeper. At least that's the way it used to be. Stama, that's the way it is. And in Bavel, the Chachamim Dafka wore very pretty clothing to honor their position. They represent something. So for people to honor it, they have to come. In America, for sure, the rabbi has to drive a nice car. That's what all the Rabbanim say when they go get themselves a fancy car. Not for them. L'shem Shammai.
I think also the Gemara in Sota says, Ayin ro'ah v'alev chomed.
Correct. Ayin ro'ah v'alev chomed. And then this is the packaging. Yeah, but Vlad, to Vlad's point, the Nukuda is that people were open to selling already in the field. So that's why they would make these efforts, not when they got to the market. They made these efforts in the field. Now, it's a pity Vlad just walked away for a second. Again, the Mishnah says not all farmers would smooth it out. That means it makes so much sense. That means if I have a field that's far away from the city, why would I make all that effort? It has to be worth it. Every case is a case. Some people, the Minigwas people ran to the field. Some people would, every Monday and Thursday, they would run out to the shuk. Why would these people, they smooth it? They wouldn't. But the point is that the Gemar Malacha happens in the field. So what would be the other alternative trigger or critical point? One step prior to the Meruach. What's one step prior? Putting it in the pile. It's a pity Vlad didn't hear this, because this answers what he was pointing out to. In other words, if I don't do that, prior to it being piled, I wouldn't take it to the market. It goes from the pile into my truck into the market. Hakitniyos, legumes, unlike grain are harvested by using a knife, a sickle. That means that you would cut it off. Legumes primarily are harvested by you plucking them out of the ground. The big difference between one and the other is that if I uproot something, Aviv, then with it will come dirt. When I cut something, even if I cut it all the way down to the ground, it will be less dirty. So it was common, since legumes are generally harvested by being uprooted, therefore, prior to selling it, it would be common that people would sift these legumes to get the dirt out, to separate it from its dirt. So that's the next step. Hakitniyos, misheyichboir, from when you sifted the dirt from them. Not everyone did it. Not everyone did it because everyone understands that there's some dirt in it. So it doesn't look good. So what? And if you don't sift them, so what would happen, interestingly, prior to sifting them? I don't know if prior. I take back the word prior. I don't know exactly. Either they sifted it. It sounds like if they sifted it, they didn't put it in a pile, or I don't know. But either yichboir or meruach. Now comes another important part of the Mishnah. Let's go back to the tvua, to the grain. Vlad, you missed an important point for this last 30 seconds, which Mamash answered your question. Afal pisha meirach, even when someone smoothes the pile of grain, and he did it, nevertheless, noitel min hakutaim, you are allowed to take grains, kernels from cut stalk that were not threshed, and to take kernels min atzadadim, even in the pile, you didn't smooth it out 1,000%. Sometimes little pieces would protrude, would stick out, and would not be part of the smooth pile. Means when you thresh it and you take out the straw, sometimes a kernel or two will be in the straw. In other words, we don't say that once you did the meruach, everything is nikbas, or was kavua lemaiser. We don't say that. We say only that which is in the pile is kavua lemaiser. But the other little parts of this product that was not properly processed, they're not this level of tevel. No, you cannot eat it achilas keva, but you can have achilas aray. And we're going to apply this to other scenarios as well, as we'll see in a moment. Okay, now the Mishnah speaks about the wine and the oil, and we spoke out today all of the words to be able to properly understand the Mishnah. From when is wine considered completed? What's the Gemar Malach of wine? Our Mishnah holds, Misha Yekape. Yekape is the stage of skimming off the Shemarim from inside the boir. And this is, again, like I mentioned, there is really a machlokes tanoim about it. Other tanoim are of the opinion that since from here it goes into a barrel, in a chavias, and in the chavias, again, as the wine ferments even more, even better, there is more separation from the shemarim and the wine that go to the top, and people would skim it off before they would sell it. So then that will be the Gemar Malach. On the other hand, there's different grades of wine. From when it's skimmed off from the boil, without doubt, it's already marketable enough. And people would pay a price. People would buy it. Maybe they would get a discounted price. So our Tana holds, that's it. Before that, even if you end up selling it, or if someone is desperate and he buys it, batla daitoi eitzel kol adam. It's not called completed. Once you skim off from the boil, you're good. Now, just like we had before by the Tfuah, that just because, since you made the meruach, we don't say that everything else hit Gemar Malach. We don't say that. We say that the little kernels that were not in the actual smoothed out pile, they are not meruach yet. Same thing will be over here in the process of making wine. Says the Mishnah, Afal Pisha Kipa, even though you already reached the stage, you skim the skins and the seeds, otherwise known as the shemarim, off the top of the boir. Nevertheless, even after you did that, there is still some wine on the gasel yoina. There might still be some wine in the tzinoir because it never went into the boir. So says the Mishnah, everything is consistent. Koilet min agaso el yoina. You are allowed to collect the little bit of wine that you can find in the gasel yoina, and or collecting some wine that's still in the tzinoid, in this pipe, and you can drink it. We're speaking about not a proper sitting and drinking. Kevin already moved on to the uka, to the olive press, so we'll leave that picture up for the uka, and you can drink it. Now put the picture back up. That's a better picture because it sounds from because it flows down into the uka. I think this is a better picture. Okay, so now we're back. Now we're the same idea when it comes to the olive press. So first, again, the olives are crushed, and they're crushed with a stone called a memel. Then they are put into the sack. The sack is called the akel. The sack is put, whoever's looking at the Zoom, on the upper part of this device, the olive press. It's pressed in its sack, and the juices flow through the akel into the uka. And the uka means a trough that was in front of the olive press. So says the Mishnah, what's the Gemar Malacha by olive oil? When it goes into the uka, that is the Gemar Malacha. And here we don't have to have Misha Yekape because there's no need to do skimming. Yes, when you sell it, you're careful to leave the shemarim in the bottom, but once it's there, it's good already. The oil on the top is pure oil. And here again, says the Mishnah, that Afal Pisha Yarad, even though this batch of oil was already processed, that means the oil generally, 99% of it, or whatever the percentages, went already into the uka, went into the trough. Nevertheless, noitel minha ekel, whatever remained in the sack, the ekel. If there was any oil that was not before that, it was somewhere under the memel, around the memel, right? The memel is that first millstone that's used in the crushing. Think about a millstone, unlike the stone that just pressed. This is a millstone. You milled it, you made it into a pulp. And in the olive, even though everything that he found, that Kevin found over here on Zoom was stone, but somewhere, whether it was on the floor, but there were wooden boards in an olive press. And sometimes the oil didn't go into the trough, it went on the ground. Now, some of it got absorbed in the ground, and you lost that. It's a small percent, but sometimes you were able to gather from in between the wooden boards, you would get some oil. Same idea that we had before by the Meruach, same idea that the little bit of oil that's here and there, we don't say since it reached the Gemar Malacha, none of the oil is allowed to be consumed ba'arai. We don't say that. You are allowed to have that arai. That the oil that's from the ekel, the oil that's from the memel, and the oil that's mebein hapatzim in between the wooden boards, they are allowed to be consumed ba'achilas arai. And interestingly, the Mishnah is going to give you an example of what would be the arai. By wine, the Mishnah did not need to give any such example. By kernels of grain, the Mishnah did not need to give any type of example. I understand that. Today we have the garbage nash, sugar, poison nash. Then that would be the nash then was kernels. They would toast them, they would eat them. Not a meal, as a snack. Drinking wine as a snack, we all know, because all of us think that we're not alcoholics. We're just having a little bit. We're not having a real drinking session. But oil, you see, nowadays, everything is crazy. Nowadays, people, myself included, I have some olive oil at night. Olive oil is very healthy. That's what, in the times of Chazal, the Gemara says that olive oil was actually mazik. People didn't have olive oil pure. The Gemara says that's why they don't make a bracha on it. And so what would be the application of arai? That's what the Mishnah is trying to give you. And the Mishnah gives you two examples. One example is v'noisen lachamita. So they would have wafers, whatever the wafers were made out of, and they would smear on top of the wafers a little bit of oil. In America, the pancakes, and you would put that syrup. So again, you can have a proper breakfast with the wafer. That will be achilas kava. And then you can just snack on the wafer. No, he's just trying, he's giving you an example. So if I'm having a snack with the wafer, on that wafer, I take a little bit of oil that I found on the ekel, on the memel, between the boards, and I can put it on the wafer. That will be permitted, even though the oil was processed, but that's only to the oil in the uka. The other example will be, now it's going to get exciting. Tamchay means a plate of food. Now, let's look inside the marafulda. This is gavaldik. The marafulda, first chamita, is the second to last narrow line in the mara. Chamita, hi uga ketana. It's a little cake. And he's saying little, I understand why, because he wants to show us how the person is only having a casual snack. It's not achilas keva. And when they would take this wafer out of the oven, right, the first wide line under the Gemara, it was common that they would smear the face of it, the top of it, with oil. Now, there's a chiddush here. And the chiddush both goes to the chamita and to the tamchay. That since people would regularly smear the wafer right after it was taken out of the oven, aside of the Iker Simanim that we are learning in our Mishnah of Gemar Melacham, there are 6 factors that will be koiva'as l'maiser, even if it did not reach these stages. One of the 6 is bishul. The very fact that the owner cooked it, that in itself is koivas. So says the Mara, what's the chiddush here? Kumash Milan, the loy chashiv kimavushel bo'esh. That even though you're taking this oil and you're putting it on top of the wafer that just left the oven, so the wafer is hot, the oil gets heated up, but it's not called bona fide cooking. And what would happen if it would be considered cooked? Second line under the Gemara in the Marafulda, sheho'esh koivas lamaser, fire is one of the 6. And if it's legally viewed as something that was heated up with fire, even arai will be prohibited. Anything that was cooked in fire. The chiddush is aval hai loy chashav bishul. Why not aviv? Because it's not in the oven. Even though it's a wafer, right? Right. I know. Let me go by cholent, by davar gush. It's not so. There's a lot of chiddushim here. We'll get back to that in a moment. And let's keep on reading in the Marafulda. And the second example, v'chein letamchay. Tamchay Why am I allowed to put it in a hot pot of food? Because the tamchoy is dafke, not the one that was on the fire. And therefore, right, the maraful, the 4 lines under the Gemara, the klei sheni einoi mevashel. Okay. Avol, keep your finger in the marafulda and back in the Mishnah. Avol lo yitein lelefes ulekedera, but you're not allowed to put it in a pan or in a pot. While kishehe mirutachin, while they are still boiling. So the marafulda explains to you his interpretation of the Chiddush of the Mishnah, back in the marafulda, 4 lines under. Avoloyiten, this oil, either likedera or leilfas. Just to know, he has the opposite version. Lelafas, leilfas. One is a pan, one is a pot. One is shallow, one is deep. Kishehe mirutachim, while they are boiling, meaning af al pi shevirim min ha'esh. If you have something that was on the fire and you took it off the fire. So the Mishnah is being machadesh that even though it's not on the fire, but if it's still boiling, don't think that you can still have it achila sarai. Why? Because this Tana, the Tanakama holds, the chol zman shehayad soiledes bahen, even though it's not boiling, unlike a cholent or very few items that even when you shut the fire, they boil a little bit longer. It's amazing how it works, right? Look at your water. The moment you shut the fire, the boiling subsides. So the din is that our Tana holds that even though it's not boiling, until when it goes down to beneath, let's say it's 110 Fahrenheit, Rav Moshe says, or something like that. It's considered bishul, and therefore the keva lemaiser. So holds the Tanakama. Now here the machlokes of Rabbi Yehuda is about hilchos bishul in the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda oimer, no, lakoil unoisen. Lakoil doesn't mean something is something on the fire. He means not only does he agree with the Tanakama that you can put it on the wafer, on the chamita, you can put it in the tamcho, in kleisheni. He says no, even inside the ilfas or the lefes, even inside the kedera, whichever one was written first. Rabbi Yehuda says you are allowed to put it in it. Look inside the marafulda. Now, 6-7 lines under the Gemara. Lakoil hunoisen lechol kederos ve'ilfasim. Even though they are roischen, you are allowed to put this oil in as long as they're no longer on the fire. And I'm going to just read the chutz inside the Mishnah. Even Rabbi Yehuda will admit that there's one exception. When the kleidishan is off the fire, is going to be mevashel something halachically, and that is if the food inside this kleidishan is sharp. So there we say that sharpness, together with the fact that it's still very hot, together with the fact that it's still in the kleidishan, that will actually cook the oil. Chutz midavar sheyesh boy either chaymitz or tzir. The tzad hashava is that there's a sharpness in vinegar, there's a sharpness in the fish brine, and this sharpness causes the hot water to cook more readily. And I want to say the following, that I forgot which Rishon, but in Masechta Shabbos, that like the question of the whole Kledish and Kleisheni is, L'chora, why Kledish and Kleisheni? Why don't you just say that if the food is on that temperature, it cooks, lower than that temperature, it doesn't cook? That was the big question that we had in the yeshiva. I'm going way back to yeshiva, and what I remember is, this is said by one of the Rishonim, or many of the Rishonim, that be'emes midoiraisa, cooking is only when it's boiling. That's cooking. Mederabanan, if it's in the kleidishain, since the kleidishain had the item boiling, even though it's off the fire and it's not boiling, Rabbi Yehuda, it's like a rabbinic law. And that's why when you can have, guys, you can have something in a kleisheni that's hotter than the same in a kleidishain, because don't forget, like what did we learn from Shitas Rabbi Yehuda? As if it's yatzoi ledes, it's going to be mavashal. So if you're going to say, let's say Yatzila, this is 110 Fahrenheit. So why don't you just say, if something is 120, 115, I'm saying 120 because they're, just to make sure. If it's 120, who cares, Kledish and Kleisheni? The answer for that will be, according to some, is because really Bishul is only when it's boiling. Medrabanan, since this pot had the item boiling, we applied the dinim up until when it's Yatzei Ledes. If it gets cooler, then it's already okay. Klei sheni never has something boiling. There are exceptions, again, shalent, gush, davar gush, but let's say klei, and that's why klei sheni is not mavashal, even if the klei sheni is hotter than the klei dish. Okay.
Wait, I'm sorry, how is the second utensil harder than the first? What law of physics is this?
No, I'm saying it could be. Kevin, I don't. If I take something off the fire and I put it in the klei sheni, the second I took it off the fire, a second that it's in the klei sheni, even though the walls of the klei sheni cool it down further, it's possible that something in a klei sheni for this instant can be in temperature-wise hotter than the food that I left in the klei dish after I took it off the fire. It's just that it's still above yatzei ledes. But in halacha, we don't make such a differentiation.
And you can't measure temperatures on Shabbat anyway, so there's no way
Even if
to...
we would be allowed, it doesn't work that way. It works with klei dish and klei sheni. It's also interesting to note that here, even Rabbi Yehuda says that sometimes chaymetz and sir, right? Chaymetz and sir, I know he's speaking about a klei dishain, but we also find, and that's why we are machmir, that we are machmir for Shabbos by holding that certain things could be cooked in a klei sheni. Not getting into all the details, and that's why people really go beyond and above when it comes to making certain drinks on Shabbos. Okay. Now, let's go back to the beginning of the Mishnah, what we learned yesterday. The item that we learned about was kishuyin and diluyin. Let's go with squash and gourds. So the Mishnah gave two signs, two options. If the farmer is someone that removes the pikas, then it's when you move the pikas. And if the farmer doesn't remove the pikas, then when you put it in a pile. That's what the Mishnah says. So it explains the Gemara that what's the meaning? Min mishayaf kisu. What does that mean? So the Gemara says what we said yesterday. What we said yesterday is based on this Gemara. Min di yirim paksuse, from when the pikas is removed. If the same thing was with the avatiach, then the Mishnah went to the watermelon, even though the word in the watermelon is from shalkuke, it's the same thing. It's just in the Mishnah, there's different words for different products. For gourds and diloyim, it's called pikas. For the melons, it's called shelek, but it's the same thing. From when that fuzzy hair is removed. Okay. Now, another thing we learned yesterday, that it's not about the cheft, it's about the gavra. Remember that? Remember the Mishnah said, the way we learned the pshat in the Mishnah from today's Gemara, that if I am a farmer and I am harvesting and planning now to fill up many kalim, even the items that reach Gemar Malacha when the keli is filled with them, it's still not the Gemar Malacha because I plan to fill up another few kalim. So we're going to apply the same thing over here also. The Gemara is going to apply it. That means if this farmer's final step in the preparation of the squash and the gourds to sell in the market is to remove the pikas, what happens if he's planning now to deal with, 100 gourds? So if he removed from the first 99, none of them reach Gemar Malacha. Same idea. Hoyem mifakes rishon rishain, or and umeshalek rishon rishain. We don't say that since you took the pikas off this one hit Gemar Malacha. We don't say that. Loy nitvalu ache yifakes kol tzarchai, or the yishlai kol tzarchai, which is gavaldik. Kol tzarchai means mashet tzarchai. I understand that to mean what the farmer is planning to do right now. His intention, now I finished doing today's labor, that is what makes it the Gemar Malach. Beautiful. Dav Zayin Amid Beis. Let's get going. Now the Gemara has a gavaldik akash based on the following premise. Where we have 6 minutes, we have to really move. We learned similar when it came to the Oines HaMaisris. The same will be when it comes to the Gemar Malacha. My friends, if an item belonged to Hegdish, and under the ownership of Hegdish, it underwent its Gemar Malacha, that item will continuously remain exempt from Maisris even after it's redeemed. Unlike if it was redeemed prior to the Gemar Malacha, which is the critical point, the Gemar Malacha was done under the ownership of a Hedyot, then it will be chayv to be tithed. Now, our Mishnah gave many examples. The first ones will be the Pikis and the Shilek, and the Mishnah said not every farmer does Pikis and Shilek. And those who don't take off their hair, it's when you put it into a pile. So now the question will be like this. If when Hegdish owned it, Hegdish did the Pikes and Shilek, but Hegdish did not put it into a pile. And then it was redeemed. And then the owner put it into a pile. Even though Hegdish is doing the PKs is not a hard and fast rule. Vaharaya, that sometimes it's not about PKs and Shilek. It's about putting it into an arema. So maybe the heter, it came to the Gemar Malacha under the ownership of Hegdish should not apply. Or maybe not, since Hegdish did the PKs and Shilek. So for these gourds, for these squashes, that is the Gemar Malacha. The Gemar Malacha was done under the ownership of Hegdish, so it will be exempt. The Gemara doesn't have an answer for that. The Gemara just opens up the question. PKs v'Shilek, but Reshus Hegdish. Upedoyoi. See how the Yerushalmi, there was so big, brief. They don't even say mahu, garnished. They have an inquiry, and the inquiry has remained unresolved. The next thing in the Mishnah was vegetables. That vegetables that are bundled, what's the Gemar Malacha when it's bundled in the field? Now the Gemara has a Gavaldic question. It wasn't that uncommon that initially it would be bundled into large bundles, and at some point to be sold in the market, it was bundled again into smaller bundles. Which one determines its Gemar Malacha? So that's the Gemara now. If initially in the field you bind it a large bundle. But your kavana is but you plan to rebundle it into smaller groups. Says the Braisa, still nitbal. It's already considered kavas lamaser, and the question will be why. If this guy is planning to bundle it again, so that's not the final process. That's not the final step. That's the Gemara's question. Rabbi Ezra boy. So he answers, it must mean, and we're going to learn it the way the Gemara learns the Gemara. We're speaking about a farmer that in the field they only bundle it once. It makes also sense because to schlep it into the market, when you're schlepping it from the field into the truck, into the wagon, into the market, the bigger the bundle, the better. I know it's heavier, but you have less, you move quicker. In the field, you're bundling it once. Who asid lo agdait cotton, either lashuk or bashuk. The Gemara says that the Braisa is only speaking about a case where the second bundling happens in the marketplace. Since in the field this is the final step, that's to call the Gemar Malach. Next thing the Mishnah spoke about, kalkala, if it's an item that are gathered in baskets, if you are living in a place, if that's the minig of the farmers, once the baskets are filled, they are covered with leaves, so the covering of the leaves, the packaging, that's the Gemar Malach. Mishiyachab. Same thing, what we learned before. What happens if you're planning to package many baskets? Even though you finished the basket and you covered this one basket with leaves, what happens if you only plan to fill half? So the din is if you filled half, that's all you're doing. That's the end for you. However, in the opposite direction, if you plan to fill the whole thing, now let's go further. If you have two baskets or more, you're going to fill up two, even though you filled up one, even though you covered that one with leaves, doesn't matter. It's consistent. It's beautiful. It's on the Gavra. The Mishnah said all of the above simanim, both of yesterday and of today, the pered is only b'moilach lashuk. But if you plan to take it home, you are continuously allowed to eat it casually. Either when you finished whatever you're doing in the field, or I'm going to word it. Why not in Pnei Hashuk? Answers the Gemara. When you're taking something home, you're not planning to sell it. So how many people are involved? Only you. So it makes sense that if you are determined to take it home, you're going to follow through with it. There's nothing stopping you. It reaching its goal is only up to you. So why would we think that it won't get there? It will get there. And your goal is it should enter the home. So the entering of the home, the Re'iyas Panei Abayis is koivas. But even when you intend to take it to the market, what, you think you're not going to sell it if a customer comes to you on the way or in the field? And since selling means seller and a buyer, Shema yimtza lekuchais. Maybe you'll have the good fortune of getting a buyer, and the buyer will come before you get to the market, and I'll say the buyer can come to the field. V'nitbelu miyad. Beautiful. We learned today in the beginning of the
thing. Right. That's the same thing with the big bundle, right?
Same thing with the big bundle. Very good, because a guy will buy it in the big bundle. B'diyuk. Let's get one more line in. This is regarding today, the peret and the tzemukim and the charuvim. So we learned in a brayso that what is the Mishnah talking about? It sounds only when you make the pile on the rooftop. Now that's very problematic. The havamina of the Gemara is it's that only when these dried items are piled on the rooftop, then that doesn't work. I'll tell you why it doesn't work. Because what we started to learn today, the pered and the tzimukim and the charuvim, is all about some things that you're selling bashuk. Why does it have to be a rooftop? So Rabbi Yoina boy, what happens if you dry them out in the field and you pile them and it doesn't make sense? So Rabbi Chinana explains the chiddush. The ruba means a chiddush. The ruba also the Brais is telling you a chiddush. Vadai, when you pile it in the field, of course that's the Gemar Melacha. Chiddush is if you plan to merchandise the pomegranate seeds, but you decided for whatever reason not to dry them in the field, to do something unusual, to dry them on your roof in your home. So we leave the same shear. Even there, even though it's home, that's the Gemar Melacha. Then the Mishnah says, what does it mean? Min dum yirim pudgera. From when you remove the rotten leaves. It's all about packaging. I wanted to get a little bit further, but it's 7:01.
Taking it to the rooftop is not considered seeing the house?
Oh, so Kevan, since you plan to merchandise it, even though you're using your home as your factory, that's what the Gemara was saying. So we apply the same rule, and it's not